Hello, and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about an experience many of us have had, which is you join a new place, and they're like, hey, welcome, there's the servers. And you're like, okay, excellent. I guess I will be figuring out what those servers are and do, and who owns them, and what applications they run, and a whole bunch of other things now that apparently I'm the guy that owns all that stuff.
You're greeted by Manager Scott, and he tells you this is all your responsibility now. And I was thinking about this as we were planning. There's another use case for this. What if you're something like a consultant, right? You're walking into an environment that you've never touched before, and you have to depend on what the customer is telling you. And you know how customers can be.
Yeah, and well, having been a consultant, I can tell you
Yeah.
that is not a great situation to be in. And generally, where I've had the best consulting engagements is when I don't do the things on those customer systems, but instead I help them do the things on the customer systems. Because a consulting engagement is weeks, days, months,
Right.
and then you're gone. So
Yep.
if you don't help the people that work there to continue the work that you need done, then it's just gone. So helping them build the skills is, I think, more helpful as a consultant than just sitting down and clacketing at the keyboard. Anyway, Nate, why don't we jump in the terminal? We'll start doing this episode thing.
We should do that. All right, here we go.
All right. So oftentimes you'll want to know what version of RHEL is on the thing, right? So if you do a cat on Etsy Red Hat release, or you do a DNF list Red Hat release, this little configuration file is dropped by this RPM called Red Hat release, and you could see what version is installed. So this is a 9.6. If I go over to this box and do the same thing, so it's 9.5. Now, if I look at the Red Hat release RPM, it's like, oh yeah, you have the 9.5 Red Hat release installed, but oh look, there's an available 9.6 Red Hat release. So I can tell that this machine has some updates likely that are available for it. The other thing that I have found places is when you walk in, they'll give you a list of like server names or maybe IP addresses, but they don't necessarily know where those live. And these days, especially with virtualization and cloud, and maybe even bare metal, you may need to know what type of machine this is to have a better handle on what kind of maintenance and other things that you need to do it on it in the future. So one of the easy ways that you can figure out what it is by looking at a ton of BIOS information that you can get from DMI decode. So you could see things like the BIOS, right? So if you're looking at a box that maybe is like homegrown, like built from parts, maybe it's like Phoenix or something along those lines. But typically, if you're an enterprise shop, you're buying gear from a vendor like Google, I'm sorry, not Google, like Dell or HP or Lenovo or somebody else, and you'll see that here. And then if you look at the system information, you'll see that also in the system information. It was vendor boxes. They often have things like the serial number and maybe your service ID or like other stuff that the vendor needs when you're calling for support for those boxes. But so this box I can see is actually a Google Compute Engine or Google Cloud system. So we're looking at cloud system. If it was virtualization, usually each virtualization provider, each hypervisor will have something in there too. So I bet if Nate looks at his on his home lab, it says something about QEMU, which is the KVM virtualization technology that ships with RHEL. You might also see VMware VirtualBox, a whole bunch of others. So you can identify like there's a cloud, and if a cloud, what cloud? And if it's a virtualization, which virtualization, and if it's a hardware, usually you can determine what hardware and information about it.
It's funny, on my home lab hypervisor, which is actually a desktop motherboard in a 2U rack case, because it was cheaper, right, and it's quieter. But anyway, if I do a DMI decode on that and look for the system manufacturer, it just says will be set by system manufacturer. It doesn't actually have anything in there because it was never set, which I thought was kind of funny when I ran it. But
Nice.
server hardware, like I have a machine running in a colo. In that case, it's set to the name of the colo provider. So they must have set the BIOS information, hard set it in the BIOS when they provisioned the machine the first time. I don't know exactly how that's set, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. And stuff from parts. Maybe that's how they can kind of control what see when they look at the boxes and introspect them a little bit. I did run the DMI decode-s system manufacturer, which pulls out just that one element of DMI decode, like Nate suggested, so you can Google box. Some other stuff. You're interested in when it was last updated. So I have 2 boxes here, and if I do a DNF history, and I'll look at it on the second one too. I spell it right? There we go. So we can see that on this one, it was last updated today with 279 packages. So that's cool. And if we look at this other one, he has not been updated. Well, he did get upgraded today for these 2 packages, but generally it was 2004 1127. It was when the last big update happened. So maybe there's some outstanding security rata and other stuff that I should be putting on my plan of stuff that I should be looking at for these systems for maintaining them.
Yeah, man, get on that.
Yeah. Who uses it?
Right.
If you use last, it shows you the last login to the box. And it's sorted from newest or most recent to least recent, right? So if you look at the top, those are the most recent people and when they accessed it. And so I can see at this box, there's this guy named ME who logs into it a lot, or at least more than anyone else. So he might know. Yeah. Well, maybe he's the guy I'm replacing. That would be sad. But maybe he's like a developer or somebody else in the organization. And so I can actually ask them more questions, because things like, what does this box do?
Yeah. I see you've logged into this machine. Why? What do you care about on this machine?
Yeah. And yeah, I worked at a company where what we had was things like, oh, it's an Oracle system. It's an Oracle database system. Or we couldn't tell what applications that Oracle database supported. And it turns out that some of them were the company financials.
Right.
Which was a little bit different than application support, right? And you had to take a little bit extra care with those boxes because they stored really critical for the company data. Whereas other things are critical for applications and keep applications well and users happy. But things like, maybe we need to back that one up more frequently, or at least make sure that we have good backups, because if something were to happen, we need to restore that financial data. Or what happens when we get a audit and we have to dump out a bunch of financial data? Those are the types of things that you have to think about once you know what it's doing.
And that brings up another good point, right? In the case of a database server or any supporting server, right? Any kind of backend server, a storage box. I'm looking through my NAS to figure out what depends on this thing. If it's a database server and the database administrator maybe doesn't have good records, or the database names don't really reflect applications that are dependent on that database, sometimes that becomes a whole other rabbit hole you have to dive down. There's 28 databases on this thing. Which ones are even in use, right? What applications are calling them, right? Like that's a whole other thing that we didn't even think to cover on today's episode, but it's a thing you'll have to think about.
Again, it depends on the organization you're joining, right? Like where I worked, there was a team of database administrators. So I was responsible for the server side stuff, and they were responsible for things like the database tables and schema and requesting more space and all kinds of other things. And then we would kind of service those. But if you are also the database administrator, good to know.
Yeah, I've worked at places like that. You're the sysadmin, and you're also supporting the databases.
Yeah. So when we started to get into this, like, what does the box do? I think the basic command to use is top, right? That'll show you the topmost processes on the system that are consuming CPU and memory. And this is a really boring box because it's not really doing much. You can see that it's basically like Linux kernel-y stuff and systemd, but no actual processes, right? It's not like you have a whole pile of Oracle database processes or a whole pile of HTTPD Apache web server processes. But this, like, what is it doing? You would expect the thing that it's actually responsible for taking over kind of the top. It should be listed somewhere in this top list of processes, and see it periodically kind of hop to the top or what have you. Java JVM is another good example. So once you figure out the process, additional digging to figure out what it really is. So like if you see, okay, so I know that we're running Java applications, but what are those Java applications? You may have to delve into the web services or other things. If you see a whole bunch of Apache or Nginx threads up top, cool. So you're doing web services, but maybe you have to look into you need to look into the document root and other stuff.
Right. So yeah, looking through top is definitely a useful tool. See what's running at the top of the list there, or in general, you could also check PS, right, to get a whole list of all the processes that are running. So that's another good way to figure out what's running on a system.
Yeah, I could do that too. Right, you can look at all the stuff. These things in square brackets, those are kernel threads. And then when you get down, you actually start to see some commands like this guy, right? So you could see the actual executables and even arguments that are passed to them as an example.
Right. It's another great way to inspect, just like what's important on this machine, what's running, what's using up the most CPU, because a lot of times that's the thing that's important, right?
Right. Because that's like this box exists to run those applications. The last command is one that we're going to go into a little bit more in a deeper dive. And that's something that Red Hat provides, and you often run into it when working with Red Hat support. And it's called SOS Report or SOS Report. So oftentimes, if you open up a support case with Red Hat, they'll actually ask you to attach one of these to the support case so that they can take a look at your machine, its state, configurations, like a whole bunch of stuff. And so if this is really good for getting kind of a overall pretty deep picture of what's happening on the machine, maybe it'd be interesting to look at when you're trying to figure out what's going on this machine.
Right.
So I'm just going to hit enter. If you're doing it for Red Hat, you can put in things like the support case ID, and then it starts going and it's building this report. And we'll take this report apart and take a look at it in the deeper dive. But here it's starting to collect data and put it into the report. What ends up happening is over in var temp, this tar archive gets created, and that's the data from the report. So we'll be unbundling that and showing some of the data, and Nate actually has a really cool navigation tool to help you get at that data that we'll cover. So I think that's a good starting point. And there's like a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to figure out, but at least in like 15 minutes, we covered the critical things. But man, we have so much more to talk about in the deeper dive, Nate.
That we do. I mean, we can delve. We might have to be careful about not going past an hour today. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. So yeah, stick with us as we transition to the deeper dive, which is a short animation. Don't forget to mash that like and subscribe. And we'll be taking apart an SOS report and taking a look at it. We're also going to be talking about a lot of other questions that you probably want to ask before when you're walking into this kind of unknown situation, and not just things about the machine, but also things like policies, right? Like, how often do you do updates? How often do you do backups? Like that kind of stuff too. So stay with us. We will return after the swooshy swoosh.
After the swooshy swoosh.
All right. So deeper dive. The swooshy swoosh. So why don't we just jump into that SOS report? Because I know that I was running one, and actually, let me just check on it real quick. Oh, it's done. Yeah. And if we pull up my screen share, you can see it'll have on it the SOS report has been generated and saved in var temp SOS report, yada yada yada. So like that's the thing. And now you can attach that to a support case if you're being asked for it from Red Hat, or you can just have it and start analyzing it. So yeah, let's get into what that thing is.
All right, let's do that. Okay, so I've got a very simplistic looking HTML document here open up in my browser. This is actually part of the SOS report. So when you generate the SOS report, it collects a whole bunch of data and it stores it in just command outputs. They're just text files, right? And if you give that to a support engineer, they know exactly what to look for. They parse through it. They have tools that will take the SOS report and parse through it and try to get answers out of it in order to make their jobs easier. But for you, as just a general administrator, you don't have those tools. So, you know, how do you find the data that you care about? Well, unless you know what you're looking for, you need some kind of guidance. And that's exactly what this HTML document can help you do, right? So at the top of the page here, it says loaded plugins, and then there's just this text list, right? Each of these items in this list correlate to a section within the SOS report. So you can see there's one for kdump, you know, there's one for the kernel, there's one for libvirt, right? In my case, I ran this on my hypervisor in my home lab. So of course it's going to collect stuff from libvirt because libvirt's running on this machine, and it actually gets quite a bit of data out of there. It'll look at, you know, like what virtual machines are running and how are they configured, and not just the ones that are running, but which ones are defined. And there's all kinds of great information that you can use if you're trying to get, you know, a good snapshot of what this system looks like. A couple that I wanted to kind of showcase, and again, we can just like search here because there isn't a nice menu that we can just click on the thing that we want. I'm going to actually go search for networking, right? You can see it's already highlighted here in my my list, and you can see here there's a section for networking. This actually literally gives you the commands that it ran. And then if I were to click on this, like this one is trying to show me what VLANs and what bridges are set up. And you can see there that these are all the network interfaces and bridges. You see at the top here, I've got VLAN bridges or VLAN tagged Ethernet interfaces that of course let my virtual machines connect to my actual network segregation. But this is really useful information if you're on a system that maybe has multiple network ports. You want a quick way to just kind of see what is there in there, right? You can also see the ETH tool output for each one of those interfaces, right? So again, if we wanted to go to my, no stats available. Sorry, I picked a bad one for that. Let's see, what else? Let's go back to the top. I think there was another one I wanted to show you. There's things for storage like LVM. If I search for LVM2, right, it'll give me outputs of things like a PV scan or, you know, a LV scan. This gives me, oh, that's kind of small. This gives me the output of how my logical volumes are deployed on this machine. really useful information if you're trying to figure out how your disks are laid out on a system, right? Let's see. There's another one for XFS. What's another good one for me to show you here? Let me look at my list of things
Well, I
that I
like that
noted.
it tells us the commands that it's running with
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
So if you're building a script or you wanted to eliminate stuff from this to minimize its runtime, you could actually toggle off some of this stuff.
There's information here from systemd. Oh, hold on. I have to get to the next. Oh, there's a lot of occurrences of the word systemd. I didn't think that through. But there's a section here for systemd, which gives you the outputs from systemd, which is really helpful. But I don't feel like going through the whole report here to get down to it. Sudo's a good one, right? Oh, again, there's a couple of them. Let me get to the section for sudo. This is logs. This is PAM. Here we go. Sudo. You can see if there's a sudo LDAP configuration, it'll show it here, right? So if you're getting sudo rules from an LDAP database or from a from like IDM, right, that would show up inside of that configuration there. How is sudo configured? The sudo conf. What does etc sudoers look like? Right, it doesn't get me the sudo.d directory, which might be useful, unless maybe that's included further down here. Doesn't look that way. So there's sections in here for Podman. Does this thing run containers? There's a section for iSCSI, right? Am I getting volumes from a SAN somewhere? Memory, libvirt, like I talked about before. Networking, I already showed you. There's a whole section for hardware. How is this server configured? There's a section for the date and time. What time zone am I in, right? What time was it on the machine when I ran this thing? Block devices, cron jobs. I mean, anything that you really want to know about this system, you can get from this SOS report. That's its purpose. That's what it's for, right?
And Granite Penguin was talking about automation. And actually, I think Shantanu was saying something similar, that when you live in this realm enough, you end up making your own toolkit for this. And I think SOS Report is a great place to start. And then you can start pulling out the stuff that you really care about and building.
Oh, right. I mean, like I said, our own support people have tools that will parse the SOS report. Because even if you know what you're looking for, there's things you really care about. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's inside of the SOS report, right? So if you're someone who has to do this frequently, you're going to end up with tooling, or it'll behoove you to come up with tooling that takes the thing we've already collected all the data with and parses it down to the stuff that you really care about.
Yeah. So if you were not interested in going further in depth than SOS Report, but you just wanted some commands to run on the command line to get some information, what other kinds of information would be interested in gathering, Nate?
What other information would be, let's see, we've already touched on a bunch. File system layout, that's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, probably.
Here, let me get this off the screen so we can continue talking. But yeah, file system layout, like I said, that's included in the SOS report. But what if you're not on a Red Hat system, right? What if you're on a system that doesn't have that tool available? Now, that's not just, I don't think that's a Red Hat only tool, is it?
Not anymore. It is generally engineered by Red Hat, but it's an open source thing. So if Google is to be believed, Ubuntu uses it too now. So yeah, like it's helpful enough for capturing stuff.
So let me switch my screen share here. I go over to, I actually have a console opened on the same system I collected that SRS report on. I just got to find the right window here. This looks like it. All right, so like I said, this is my hypervisor. And let's say we don't have SOS report at our disposal, and we want to try to look up some of these things. File systems, we can just check with df. If I could type properly. Now, this is going to look terrible simply because I have a whole bunch of containers that also run on this machine. What you're seeing here is the container file systems for all those things. You could use grep or something to take these out, but
I mean, that's also important to know, right?
Like, it is.
Maybe you now need to know container registries and who owns all these applications and containers and is responsible for building and maintaining them. So like it sends you down yet another rabbit hole.
Right. Right. Looks like my boot volume is full. I better look into that, huh?
If you want to boot.
All right. Encrypted file systems. I don't have a good example for encrypted file systems, but you can also try to get that information out of mount, right? Encrypted file systems look differently in mount.
They also look differently in DF, mostly because
Yeah.
the Lux file systems go through the device mapper subsystem. So you'd see like dev mapper or something, and the Lux volume name is in there. So it looks a little bit different than logical volume dev mapper stuff.
Right. Right. So, but yeah, so encrypted file systems, obviously a thing that you not only want to know about, but you want to know, how do those things get unlocked?
Yeah.
Is there a password that has to be entered? Is it going to unlock at boot? These are things you're going to want to look into. Is it using an encryption server, right? Is it using like a network bound disk encryption unlock server? What the Tang, is that the I always forget whether it's Tang or Clevis that's the server.
Yeah. I think it's Tang, if I remember correctly.
So
yeah, you don't want to be driving to the data center at 2 a.m. to type in passwords on boxes that were rebooted. Like, you want to know that in advance.
Right. Sudo, we kind of touched on. If you go to, of course, Etsy sudoers.d, I don't have anything configured on this particular machine, but that's a great place to look. That I noted that I don't know if the SOS report didn't include it because I don't have it configured, or if it doesn't look in sudoers.d. That would require more testing. But in the case of the report that we had, there was nothing mentioned in sudoers.d, but there's nothing on this machine on sudoers.d, so that could be why. But also, Etsy sudoers itself is, of course, where you configure sudo generally. And then, of course, the sudo configuration file. And that sudo LDAP config, which would tell us, are we getting rules from an outside source, right? Another, on that same note, right, are we getting authentication 100% locally, or are we getting it from an external directory, right? And Scott, I don't know if you have a great trick on how to get this. I would probably check things like, what does Etsy password look like and Etsy shadow? Do I have evidence that there's users that are accessing this machine that don't exist in there? You can use things like ID and getEnt to query different sources for user information. I don't know if you have a surefire way, like, yes, check this file, it'll tell you.
I would look in the PAM configuration file. So like Etsy pam.d system-off, because that'll have any additional modules for other authentication types like LDAP or WinBind. So that's where I would go to see if I should further look down that path, right? Yeah.
Okay. So there's a couple ways to get that. All right. Let me get the next command I want to use out of our notes here.
Yeah. The trick with getEnt is you have to know what the entry is that you're trying to get.
Yeah.
If you don't know that, then like you're just guessing.
But if I did like an ID and then the name of somebody who's in an external database or an external directory, then if the system already knows about that and knows how to query the directory, it'll say, oh, yes, that person is not local, but I can still get the entry. And that'll give you a hint that, oh, well, this person's not in Etsy password. They must be coming from an external directory. And then you know to go look for that.
Yeah, but you have to know the ID to query it with, right? And
well, so
we're brand new. We may not know who the people are yet.
Well, you used last, remember, to look and see who was logging into the system.
So
right?
You just end off of them.
So if I do last and I see, some username that obviously is not inside of my local entries, if I do an ID on that username, the system will automatically query the external directory to find out if they're there or not, right? So it's just another way to see, did they come from an external source or not? But you're right, with getEnt, I think you have to tell it what directory to query. So you'd have to do like getEnt LDAP and then the name of the person you're looking for.
And Billy brought up using Ansible with gather facts, which will gather a bunch of host facts.
That's true.
So that's another option if you want to use Ansible instead.
Another great tool. I forgot to touch on this when we talked about sudo, but when we were doing our CTF challenge at Summit, a lot of people told me they didn't know this command. As a user, you can do sudo-l to see what you have access to, right? So as root, you can become other users, do sudo-l, or I think you can do sudo-l and then say what user to list it as. Probably like a backwards way to look at sudo configuration, but it's another option, right? So if I log into a machine, I'm new to this system, I want to know what I can do with sudo-l will tell me. So I'm root at the moment. I have no idea what sudo-l looks like as root. There you go. I can do everything. I can sudo all the things.
Oh,
But that's basically what it looks like. All right. What about time settings? Time and date settings. There's two ways that I looked at how to do this. Now, I believe there's also, you can like delve through Etsy and find where the time zone is configured, but you don't necessarily have to do that because date will actually tell you. If I paste this in here, date, of course, when you issue the command date, you can pass in a format so it'll give you just the things that you want back. The %Z, capital Z, and %lowercase z will give you the time zone you're set to and what offset you are from UTC. And in this case, this machine is set to Eastern Daylight Time, and it's 4 hours off of UTC, right? So that's helpful. But there's also a tool called time date CTL.
The time command or the date command also gives you your time zone by default in the output. So if you just like run date, it's in there.
There you go. I was looking. I'm trying to be as efficient as possible here, Scott.
Fair enough.
Efficiency matters, right? Okay, the other thing is time date CTL. And again, your mileage may vary depending on what distribution of Linux you're on. This tool may not be included with everything. It is on RHEL. But time date CTL will output some date information, including what time zone you're in, what time it thinks it is, what time UTC is, right? There's extra stuff here. And you can use time date CTL to set the time zone and things like that as well. So that's really what that tool is for.
One thing I like about the time date CTL output is it tells me whether NTP is used. So it's not just telling me the time on the system, but actually a little bit more of that I should look at Crony or NTPD.
Right. Let's see. Next on my list is the firewall. Firewall is a important thing to figure out. So when you're like delving into networking, you're probably going to want to check the firewall as well. There's probably a couple ways to get the data you might want out of the firewall D configuration. What I like to use is this firewall CMD --list-all, which does a pretty good job. It gives you a good little summary here of kind of what zones or what zone is active and what services are configured within that zone, what interfaces are within that zone. So you can see here that this is, I've got a couple things open for things like my media server and my Valheim servers that I'm running. Important things here. You can get deeper into this, of course. Sorry, I just got distracted by chat. I see Shantanu asking about unit files. We had that in the critical path and we skipped over it. So maybe I'll do that next. But yes, you can list what unit files are configured at boot time. But before we get off of firewall, just note firewall CMD has a bunch of subcommands that can do things like, what zones are configured. I think it's list zones with an S. Maybe it's list all zones. I didn't jot this one down. There it is. So this tells us what all the zones configured within Firewall D are. That can be helpful as well. And it gives you a summary of how they're configured, stuff like that. So regarding Shantanu's question about systemd units, I did jot down, here we go. So what I would care about if I was trying to figure out what this server was for is I would want to know not just what systemd units there are, but which ones are active, because that would generally imply that these are probably services that are starting at boot. These are services that the system is running. I tried to look for just all that are enabled, but I couldn't get systemd to give me that. There must be some other syntax. There must be some other state flag for enabled. State equals enabled. It didn't seem to get me what I needed, but state equals active will give you a nice list of all of the things that are currently active on the system. And of course, it gives you the same pager you'd expect with systemd. Now, remember, systemd controls a whole bunch of stuff. You can see all my network interfaces in here. I could probably do like a type equals service to make this a little bit easier. Oh, equals, not dash. I think this will work. There we go. This is probably a little bit of a better view for you. So it's not giving you everything systemd cares about. It's giving you the services specifically. You can see that this thing runs iSCSI. You can see I actually have my Podman pods set up to run as systemd services. That's why you see Jellyfin in the list here. Network manager, a bunch of other, I don't know. This is the list of active services. I don't know what else we can delve into, but this will give you a good idea of kind of what's running on the system. And of course, you can look at in this column output as to kind of the descriptions as to what these things are. All right. Did we have any other questions? I'm rambling on a lot here.
There's been some discussion about time zone that you should set and whether you should set a UTC or not.
Yeah.
And so like most of the companies I've worked with, the headquarters have been East Coast, and that's where the team is that does all of the server management.
Yep.
And so for me, I used East Coast timing because then I could like look at my watch and be like, oh, it's 3 a.m. and this happened at 2 a.m. Let me craft my grep in the logs for 2 a.m. Whereas if we set everything with UTC, then I have to figure out what the UTC offset is to then do my grepping for logs. But if you're in a distributed team, or maybe the team is Pacific Coast based and they decided they were going to do Pacific Coast time on their time zones, you may have to do maths at inconvenient times when you are tired. And
date and time math is always a pain in the butt.
Well, yeah, because like right now you're set to Eastern Daylight Time, which is daylight savings versus not daylight savings or standard time changes at different times in the world. So yes. Yeah, like UTC always stays the same though. So maybe that would be a good choice if you have, especially in a mixed environment.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're running services for especially global services, UTC probably makes a whole lot more sense. Again, this is my home lab, right? I expect my home lab to be on the same time that I'm on. So that's why it's set to my local time. It kind of makes sense, right? Okay. Let's see here. I think there was another one I wanted to show. Oh, SE Linux. What's the state of SE Linux on this machine? We've had this conversation before, Scott, between get enforce and SE status. So I decided to show both. So get enforce just gives you whether it's enforcing permissive or disabled. And SE status gives us a little bit more of an extended output, including a little bit of, additional information here, mainly about things like what policy it's using, whether it's set to be enabled at boot time, whether it's currently set to, whatever. Other thing that I think is important when you're checking out how SE Linux is configured is the local policy changes. And in my case, that's generally just inside of SE Linux targeted, which is the policy that you're in. If you're using a different policy, then obviously this would be a different directory structure. Contexts, files, and then there's this file contexts.local. Whenever you use SE manage to set SE Linux contexts on a directory or a file so that when you did a restore con, it would then apply that goes into this file. So if there's been anything configured on this machine that had to change the SE Linux contexts, it's going to be here. Right. And that's also probably something that you want to know about. You can see I've got a couple cases here where I have set specifically container data, right, within my SE Linux local configuration. All right. So this is all about the system, right? There's probably more we could delve into for this particular system. We talked a little bit about workloads. But you also need to think about networking when you're talking about how a system is configured. And I don't have good demos set up for each one of these. We can certainly poke around at different commands as we want to. I don't even know if some of these tools are installed on this machine now that I'm thinking about it. But some tools at your disposal would be things like checking the local configuration, the local network configuration with IP space A, which would give you just a general list of all of the network interfaces on this machine. Again, this is not only a virtual hypervisor, it's also a Podman host. So there's a bunch of weird network configuration on this machine. But again, right, good example. If you're walking into an environment where you've never worked on these machines before, you want as much of that information as you can grab, and then you can parse through it as time permits to say, why are there 134 network interfaces on this machine? Well, it's because a lot of these are virtual and network interfaces for things like my Podman containers and for things like my virtual machines. There's a fun tool called, or a fun subcommand of IP. Let me clear the screen here, called IP neighbor. And what this does is it gives you essentially the ARP cache on this machine, right? It's telling you what IP addresses do I have in my ARP cache table, which is usually a pretty good indicator of what IP addresses this machine has communicated with, which could give you a good idea of dependent machines or machines that are dependent on this one, just by looking at, what does it know about, right? So that's another useful thing to have. Once you have information about things that are outside of this machine, you can use stuff like ping and tracepath. And I think, Scott, you had another tool that did something similar to what tracepath does, but I don't remember what you called it.
MTR. It's my
MTR.
traceroute. MTR.
I don't think I have MTR. Let's see. I do
You
not.
can install.
I do have MTR.
So if you do like 4.2.2.2.
Well, that's handy. Look at that.
And
And so this is getting. Sorry, go ahead. I talked over you.
Look at your 0% packet loss. Very nice.
Yay. So this is getting outside of your local Linux machine, right? But if you've inherited an environment, you don't care about just the Linux machines. I mean, maybe that's what you, at a core, what you care about. You probably also care at least a little bit about what it's connected to and what the network topology around it looks like. What's the path to the internet look like? What's the path to the machines that it cares about look like, right? And then that also leads to things like firewall rules. What ports are open? Let's see. We can get that out of SS.
Well,
These are all the ports that are open on this machine. Sorry, go ahead.
Depending on the size of the organization, a lot of times there's a network team and they manage all that. So like that's someone that you should go meet. Because a lot of times, like the system side, they'll just leave it no firewall because they rely on the networking team to do all of that work.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, when I worked at the college, I was close friends with the network administrator, and that's really helpful. Because when you're running into weird issues, a lot of people just love to throw that over the wall and go, "Oh, that's the network's problem," right? If instead you go to the coffee shop with the network guy and you guys sit and hash out the problem, right? That's a lot more productive. So make friends with your network team and your storage admin. Like these are people you want to know and you want to be friendly with.
Well, it's not just them. Like, so yes, you'll work with the storage team, the network team. You may work with a data center or virtualization team,
Right.
maybe cloud team. Then you also have to work with the risk team or infosec team. Like, yeah. So depending on how big your organization.
Nobody likes to work with those guys.
So there was a question. I know we had this as a topic later, but there's a question. So I was going to pull it up.
Sure.
Hold on. Let's scroll back. Hank asks, how do I check if it was backed up?
That gets to be really subjective, right? So when it's really going to depend on how it's backed up. If there's an agent running on this system for something that looks like a backup, like an enterprise backup solution, then you would have hopefully found that when you were parsing through all of the system services. Once you find that, you can then look at its logs and see if it's run recently. You could be doing, simple cron jobs that are doing backups, and you would have found that when you started poking at cron, which we haven't really covered yet. So maybe there's just a shell script that runs a tar gzip and sends it off to an extra machine. There may be external mounts that are named in ways that make you realize this is where the backups are going, right? That's another way to look. So yeah, services that look like backup agents would be the first thing. Cron jobs would be the second that I would look for. I don't know if you have any other tricks for that, Scott.
And that would be one where I would probably not start with system introspection, but would start with like asking somebody else that works there. Like
What?
maybe your manager that hired you, because it's not going to be painfully apparent what the schedule is, where the backups are stored, and a variety of other things that you would want to know. But the first question is, do we have a backup solution? What is it? And where does it get stored?
Right. And Billy brought up in chat that VM snapshots would be pretty much invisible to the OS. So if they're virtual systems, which hopefully you figured out when you were looking at DMI decode, there could be backups happening at the virtual level that you may not even know. You may never know, right? They're just snapshots, or sometimes there's agents that actually use, they go through your virtualization infrastructure and can actually get into the operating system and pull out backups. And your system may not be aware of those at all. So yes, good point.
Yeah, and Conan Kudo says, what if you're the only one coming into this and the previous team is all gone? So then...
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, so ask the question, because somebody hired you, right? It's not just you.
Yeah.
You work for someone. So if they don't know, then it's time that you start making your own decisions and saying, I would recommend the following things. And this is something that we see posted on Reddit a lot, in the sysadmin Reddit. Is like, I got pulled into this company. What are the top 10 things I need to be doing? Right? Because I don't know anything. And so it's like system introspection, figuring out where, like, if things go horribly wrong, what would you need to get it right? Right. And backups is a great example of that. Who the different people are that you will work with, and forging relationships with them. But then once you've kind of got the lay of the land, then you can start putting together proposals for improvement. So if there is no backup strategy or solution, I would put that in my like list of things that I would want to get addressed pretty quickly. If there's no storage management and like things just happen, like any place where stuff is just happening, that's probably something you want to wrangle to get a better idea of why it's happening, how it's happening, and who it's happening with, so that
and
you can make sure
being thrown into a situation like that. I've talked in the past about kind of that first administration job that I had, which was at this little web host. It was very much like that. The guy that ran the place he used to be the guy that ran everything, kind of like the trope we have with Manager Scott, right? He knew his stuff, but he'd slowly moved into the development branch of things, and he hired in a systems administrator, or a network administrator officially, that did all of that for him. And he'd been through like 3 of them before I was hired. And the guy before me was only there for like 8 months before he left for a better job, right? So he gave me everything he had, but what's the stuff that he never knew about, right? What's the stuff that he never learned before he left, right? And I was there for a good 5 years, 4 years, something like that. But so when I come across those folks, like you were saying on Reddit, that are like, what do I do? I have no idea what to do. This is so overwhelming. Yes, it is. It's very overwhelming, but you're in a position to really impact change. And that's what I try to convey to those people. Like, figure out what you've got, figure out the right way to do it, and start making a case, right? Because you're in a position where you are about to learn so many things. You're in a position that's going to help you build your career from here on. Maybe you only spend 3 years there and you're burned out and you want to go into some place that's a little better organized. But the stuff you're going to learn at this place is going to stick with you forever, right? You're going to have like that like forged in fire experience.
Well, and things like in the critical path, we looked at when was the system last had software applied to it, right? Like, man, the number of places I've worked that updates don't happen is scary. And that's something that for sure you want to make sure gets addressed. At least, and it may not be all updates, right? And it may not be all updates all the time, but it might be things like I need to make sure that critical errata are updated or critical and important errata, and having a practice around doing that where there has been zero.
Right. Right. All right. So we've exhausted a lot, maybe not everything we had in the list. Like I said, we have a long list here. There were a couple things I wanted to touch at before we closed up the episode. These are things we've shown in the past, or at least talked about in the past. One of those tools for network inspection is Nmap, and we always include the caveat along with Nmap that if there is a network or security team, before you start like scanning your network and large with Nmap, you want to make sure that those are people who know you're about to do it. Doing scans on individual systems may not be so noticeable, but still, it's a thing that if they notice it, they're going to think it might be an attack, and that could generate a question from your InfoSec team. So be careful using Nmap. But Nmap does have tools that will let you sweep an entire network, check what ports are open. So if you know that the subnet you're about to scan are all the systems that you are responsible for, it's a great way to get a map of what's listening where, and then you can parse through all those ports to see what services are actually where. And that'll help you build things like network security, right? After you've figured out what services are there, you can figure out what should not be listening and start blocking those things off. And that'll just improve your network in general. You can also do a ping sweep using just the ping tool. Ping doesn't, that I could find, have a flag that will do a sweep all by itself, but you can just throw that through a for loop. There's syntax for ping that'll make it do only a single ping at a time. You can lower the timeout for ping so that it's not going to take 3 days for your ping sweep to run. But you can just say, like, from 1 to 254, ping every address with one small packet, and only wait a couple of milliseconds for the response. And if you don't get a response, you know it's probably a dead host, or that it's filtering ICMP. That's the other thing you got to think about. Nmap can help you there, though. Nmap can do those sweeps without using ICMP. So just keep that in mind. I think that's everything I had.
Yeah, I know that there's a ton more that we had listed, but like we're at time, so let's call it.
Yeah, we kind of are.
And we don't have what we're doing next week yet, but we will have an episode next week. And then in 2 weeks, Nate, you'll be away.
Yeah. We thought I was going to be away next weekend, but it turns out that it's 2 weekends away because, like I said earlier, date math is hard. Counting by sevens is hard.
In 2 weeks, we'll be doing regular expressions. But next week, we'll do something else interesting and fun for Linux. So join us for another episode of Into the Terminal at some point in the future. Don't forget to like that the episode and mash that subscribe. And great chat today, guys. If you're a deferred viewer, don't please feel free to leave us a comment. So
yeah, absolutely. This has been an interesting episode. Have a great one, folks.
Right. See you all later.